Recording. Okay, so welcome to Parshat Beshalach. And we're going to do, I think, six topics tonight. First of all, we're going to start with a summary, as we always do. Talk about um, the decision that Pharaoh made to chase after the children of Israel, talk about the splitting of the sea, talk about the Song of the Sea, talk about Miriam and the role of women in the Song of the Sea, and maybe if we have time, I will say something about Amalek. Right now, I have a feeling that maybe my AirPods are not working. Can somebody just unmute yourself and say something so I can hear something besides just me myself talking? Helen, you're on.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello?
Yeah, I think my AirPods aren't working. Give me a second. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on with them. All right, this says that they are connected. All right, well, let's see what happens. Okay. All right, so let's start with the summary. Okay, we are in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot. So Parshat Beshalach starts in chapter 13, verse 17, and it goes until chapter 17, verse 16. So 13:17 to 17:16. This is a very dramatic parsha, a very dramatic set of narratives that happen this week. And the name of the Parsha Beshalach literally means when he sent, and as always, it's found in the very first verse of our Parsha. So here's the summary. So right after allowing the children of Israel to depart from Egypt, Pharaoh changes his mind and he he chases after them to force them to come back, and the Israelites find themselves trapped between the armies of Pharaoh in the back of them and the sea in the front of them. And this is just the short version of the story. God tells Moses to raise his staff over the water, and the sea splits and allows the Israelites to pass through. This is probably one of the most famous biblical moments, I think, that there ever was. Um, and then the sea closes over the pursuing Egyptians. Moshe and the children of Israel sing a song of praise and gratitude to God. And then they're in the desert, and the people are suffering from thirst and from hunger, and they repeatedly complain to Moshe and Aaron, to Moses and Aaron. God miraculously sweetens some bitter waters and later has Moshe bring forth more water from a rock by striking it with his staff. God causes manna, which in Hebrew we call mun, to rain down from heaven every morning before dawn. And also, they are fed meat from the story of the quails that appear every evening in the Israelite camp. This is God answering the demands for food and water. The In the story of Man, in the story of the manna, the children of Israel are instructed to gather a double portion on Friday because no manna is going to descend on Shabbat, which matches how we do Shabbat today. That is to say, we don't prepare food on Shabbat. Everything is prepared beforehand. And some people disobey and they go and they try to gather manna on the seventh day, but they don't find anything. Aaron, um, this is very exciting because someday we may actually see what this looks like. He gathers a small quantity of the manna in a jar, and it's intended to be a testimony for future generations that this is what God fed the Israelites when we were in the desert. I guess nobody has seen them for 3,300 years or so, but and then the story ends. The story of this parsha ends in a place called Rephidim, where the people are attacked by the Amalekites, and the Amalekites are defeated by both by prayer and also by battle. Okay, so that's the overview. There's some real huge highlights in this week's parsha. And I want to start by talking about the decision that Pharaoh made to chase after the children of Israel right after he told them, you can leave. Okay. So now I'm in Shemot in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verse 5. It was reported to Pharaoh that the people had fled, and Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, what is this that we have done, that we have released Israel from serving us? So Pharaoh spoke as if he had just forgotten why he insisted that the nation of Israel leave in the first place, that he seems to have forgotten all of the devastation that was wrought by the plagues, and especially by the 10th plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn. And there is in here for us a lesson in human nature. And that lesson in human nature is that when a person's self-interest is involved, they can rationalize anything in their own favor. And where do we see that more clearly than in the case of I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth between the English and the Hebrew translation. Um, Pharaoh, where his country is devastated, has been devastated by 10 plagues. People are still mourning. People are still burying their dead and grieving over their dead. And he's like, what were we thinking? Why did we that wasn't a good idea. We got to go get them. Okay. And somehow he convinces his army. I don't, well, he's Pharaoh, so I guess they have to listen to him, but whatever. Lots of people go along with that kind of thinking. So you can see that probably even in your own life that some things, whether it was you or somebody towards you, can rationalize something that is otherwise not a rational decision because their own self-interest is on the line. Okay, let's talk about the splitting of the sea. In Hebrew, this is called Kriyat Yamsuf. Kriya is the word for tear, and actually the custom, we've never talked about Jewish mourning customs, but the custom is that when you hear about the death of somebody close to you, one of the seven close relationships, mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, or spouse, you you literally rip the clothing that you're wearing when you hear the news. So Kriyat Yamsuf, splitting, tearing, whatever it's the parting of the Red Sea. Okay, the miracle of the parting of the sea was performed by God through the hand of Moshe. Okay, and it happened 7 days after they have left Egypt. And and again, I've set the scene. Pharaoh and the Egyptian army are pursuing the Israelites into the water now, or to the edge of the water. And according to the Midrash, according to the rabbinic commentary, among the Israelites, there were opinions, four camps, four opinions about what they should do. So some people said, we have to throw ourselves into the sea. Some people said we should return to Egypt. Some people said we should fight the Egyptians. And some people said we should pray. And Moshe, however, rejected all four options. And he says to the people, I'm going to tell you what he actually says according to what the Bible says, but also I'm going to tell you what we say in our house. So he says, this is in Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. Fear not, stand by and see the salvation of God, which he will show you today. For as you have seen Egypt this day, you shall not see them again forever. God shall fight for you, and you shall be silent. Okay, so just to take that apart, there's a bunch of things that he's reassuring the people not to be afraid. God is going to come through for us. This is the last time you're ever going to see the Egyptians. Okay, so my husband and I have this is what we say about this. We say, stand ye back and see the power of God, which I'm pretty sure comes from the Cecil B. DeMille version of this story, but it's sort of, to us, it's funny. Thank you, Vicky, for laughing. Okay, so how did the splitting of the sea happen? So according to the Midrash, it all comes down to one man whose name is Nachshon. He's the head of the tribe of Yehuda. And this is what the sages say about him. So Israel, the people, the nation is standing facing the sea, and the command is given that they should move forward, but everybody's hesitating because right now it looks like a death march. And nobody wants to be the first one to jump in until Nachshon, who he understands what's happening. He jumps into the sea. He goes up to the water. According to the rabbis, the water goes up to his nose. And at that moment, there, drama, drama, drama. Moses is standing and praying. Um, and God says to him, "Why are you praying?" And Moses says, "Well, what?" I'm paraphrasing. What am I supposed to do? And God says, "Lift up your staff and spread your hand over the seas, which will split, and Israel will come into the sea upon dry land." And so it was. But it didn't happen until Nachshon took the lead. There were some people I learned today, I never knew this before, but my teacher told me today, there were some people that followed him, but he's the one who gets credit for starting the process. So when he starts walking into the sea, it's not it's not split yet. And it is a matter of emunah. It is a matter of faith that he goes and sort of takes this risk, and the water doesn't start to split until he's almost ready to drown. It's a very dramatic moment. Okay, so we know that the water somehow solidified into walls, and the rest of the people were able to walk through. Now, there's an opinion that the sea did not merely split into two, like with one big path, but that it actually split into 12 channels through which each tribe crossed with their tribes people, whatever the members of their tribes. And according to this opinion, the walls were somehow sort of semi-transparent so that everybody could be reassured that everybody else was getting through also. In other words, if the walls were opaque, is that what it means that you can't see through them, opaque? So if they were only able to see who's in front of them and who's behind them, they might have been concerned that nobody else was getting through. But they were reassured, even though everybody was going through their own in their own path, that they were reassured that that everybody was going through. And there's a very interesting, according to the Midrash, at the same moment that the Red Sea parted, all the other water in the world split as well. So this happened obviously way before way before our time, where we have like social media, that if something happens across the world, you can find out about it almost at the exact moment. But this is like God's social media, right? So God is letting the world know. Now, some people who were in the surrounding countries could see, because the walls of water were so high, they could just visually see it. You can imagine that. But people who were further away, they were not able to they were not able to see the water, but they could see if they were having a cup of coffee or a cup of water, or the pond in their backyard, or wherever they had a body of water, that those bodies of water split at the same time. So God is demonstrating, not just for the Israelites, not just for the Egyptians, but for the entire world, his power over nature. I think that's a very cool image. Okay, now the Egyptians, they see the people they've been chasing are in the middle of the water now. And so they're going to start rushing in, and they are hot in pursuit. And then God turns his attention. Now, it takes hours and hours, because this is millions of people that need to cross through. This is not something that happens in 5 or 10 minutes. There's millions of people that need to cross this body of water. So some people say it's the next morning when God starts paying attention to the Egyptians, and he uses clouds and fire to confuse them, and to make it super, super hot. It's so hot that the wheels of their chariots like fall off. They melt off. The horses are struggling. The muck that was dry land for the Israelites to walk through is now wet, and the horses are having trouble getting through. The Egyptians are in complete turmoil. And then Moshe stretches out his hand over the sea, and it returns back to cover the Egyptians. Okay. And in the confusion that follows, the water comes crashing down. They are drowning them, and the water is churning them around, churning them around. And according to the Midrash, the remains of the Egyptians kind of got spit out on the other side of the shore, so that the Israelites would be reassured that their enemies, number one, were dead. They wouldn't think that they had somehow survived by walking through the sea in the same way that they did. But also, all of the the bling that was attached to their chariots or that they were carrying along with them were also were also spit out and landed on the seashore, and they could just go and pick up the the gemstones or whatever was decorating all of the chariots. And so they left that moment not only with their lives, but with even more wealth than they left Egypt with. And this is where the Torah tells us that the people, quote, believed in God and in Moses, his servant. I mean, they had just seen something like so amazing. Recognizing that this great miracle had occurred, this is where Moshe and the people of Israel sing the what is called in Hebrew Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. It is also known as Az Yashir, which means then he will sing. Um, so so let's move into this moment. The people are overcome with. Could you imagine like how it is that they saw this amazing miracle and they have survived and now they are actually enriched and they see all the pieces and they see this is the the sort of end of the story of Joseph being sold or transferred to Egypt. And you know all the pieces because we've been talking about them week by week, but you know how all the pieces connect. But this is like this amazing conclusion to the Yosef story, to the Joseph story, when he first gets sold into Egypt. And I think one of the lessons for us is this idea that we don't know God's big plan. And somebody once said that it's as if we're living like in some random page in the middle of a book, and we don't know the whole story. So we think that our experience or our lifetime is the whole story. This we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years for the cycle of the story that started with Joseph being sold or to buy as a slave by his brothers to the conclusion where the family, now much enlarged, leaves Egypt um, in wonder, in splendor, in the fullness of God's power, leaves Egypt and in great wealth. Okay, so Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, is one of 10 biblical songs. A biblical song is when suddenly all the pieces come together for whoever the players are, and we are granted some kind of a vision of how God operates in the world. Now, this is where I would like to try to play um, try to play a song for you, but let me see if it works if I share my screen. Um, now, um, is there any chance that you can see Miriam's song? On, do you see that? Yeah. Okay, listen. Tell me if you can hear this. Can you hear that? No, it did not work. All right. Um, all right. I'm going to send you the link because what it is, it's so chaval. What a shame that I can't play that for you now. Um, but there's a woman, she passed away, I think, in 2016. Her name was Elizabeth Swados, and she did this one album called Bible Women. And basically, what she did is that she took a translation of Az Yashir of the Song of the Sea, and she made it into a song with a sort of gospel-y sound. Actually, Jody, you'll tell me if you think it sounds like that when you listen to it. But I thought it was so interesting to me. I heard it the first time years and years ago, and I thought, most Jewish music doesn't sound like this. But it's totally like straight out of, there's no like Jesus stuff or anything about it. It's straight out of Tanakh. And it's very cool. Okay. So let's talk, what are these 10 songs? So we'll see if you know any of them. So the first one is actually what we know as Psalm 92, Mizmor Shir Shel Yom HaShabbat. This is the song that Adam, now we're going way back in history, that Adam sang after the creation was completed, Psalm 92. That's considered the first of the 10 biblical songs. The second is what we're talking about now, Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, and this song that was sung by the Israelites following the drowning of the Egyptian army and their saving and their from saving them from returning to Egypt and returning to slavery. Okay, the third comes from the book of no, oh wait, let me just tell you where it is. Shirat Hayam, you'll find in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verse 3 to chapter 15, verse 19. Okay, that's the full text. And actually, I want to also send you, so sharing my screen doesn't seem to work, and I don't know why, but I'm going to send you an image of what it looks like in a Torah scroll, because most of the time, the text in a Torah scroll is just, one line after another. But the Shirat Hayam is written in a Torah scroll very differently. It looks it looks like poetry, like a little line and then some white space and a line. Let me make myself a note to show you an image of what it looks like. Okay, the third biblical song comes from the book of Numbers. This is much shorter, chapter 21, verses 16 through 18. It's called Shirat HaBe'er. It's the song of the well. This is the song the Israelites sang in Thanksgiving, not Thanksgiving like turkey, but in giving thanks for the well that had accompanied them through the desert for 40 years. And this is again in the book of Numbers, in the book, we'll get to that eventually later this year, the book of Bamidbar, chapter 21, verses 16 through 18. In the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Devarim, chapter 32, 32 1 to 32 52. This is a very long one, is the song known as Ha'azinu, which literally means to listen. It's also the name of the Torah portion. And what's happening at this time is that Moshe is about to die. This comes towards the very end of the Torah. And the Israelites, or the Hebrews, I'm not sure what they're called now because way after the giving of the Torah, they're being called upon to actively listen to the message that's being taught them to Moses so that they'll be able to pass this message down to future generations. So Ha'azinu was sung to them by Moses before he died at the conclusion of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And it's sung by Moshe to assure the spiritual future of his people that he has been guiding and taking care of for all of these decades. It includes words of warning, of instruction, of hope. It reaffirms that God is caring for them, loves them, and will take care of them in all circumstances. And it it is it reflects both the past, present, and the future of Israel, the ups and downs, the rises and the declines. It's not like the way that Shirat Hayam is about something that just happened. It's really a warning more for the present and for the future. And the generation that was alive to hear it, at least the men, they were already born into physical freedom. Most of the men who escaped Egypt died in the desert, not the women, by the way, and we'll get to that at some point. I don't know when. But most of them, they could be 20, 30, 40 years old, however old they are. They were born after the Exodus from Egypt. So it wasn't like the relief of the Song of the Sea that is in our parsha, but rather they are able to listen to and take in what Moshe is saying from a place of more security and so forth. Okay, so Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, in this week's Parsha, which was sung 40 years before Ha'azinu, what I'm telling you about, the fourth of the 10 biblical songs, was like this instantaneous outburst of joy at the realization of the physical freedom after all of these miracles. Ha'azinu is a more calm, considered song. Okay. Then that's the end of the five books of Moses, but the other ones we find in other books of Tanakh and other books of the Hebrew scriptures. The next one is really was not familiar to me at all. I actually had to look it up. It's called Shirat HaGivon. This is in the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verses 12 through 15. So Givon is a place in the valley of Ayalon near Yerushalayim. Today, it's near, if any of you have been to Israel, it's near Beit Shemesh. Okay, and in fact, that in Ramat Beit Shemesh, the main one of the main drags is called the Ayalon. I think it's anyway. Joshua, Yehoshua was the leader now because this is where we are in the story. Moses is dead. Yehoshua, Joshua is in charge. And this is where he has to conquer Canaan. He has to conquer the land. And he gets the sun to stand still on Givon. And in order that he can continue to wage war and defeat the enemies and allow the Hebrews to enter and set up the division of land so that each tribe has its own place and to set up the sanctuary in Shiloh. This is not yet the Beit Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, but this happens in the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verses 12 through 15. The next one is called Shirat Devorah. This is in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim, chapter 4, verse 4 to chapter 5, verse 31. And this is the story in the book of Judges of the prophetess Devorah, that she sang this song after the Hebrew army defeats the local army, led by their general Sisera. And I'm assuming you're somewhat familiar with this basic story, but Devorah also sings about Yael, who is actually not part of the Israelite nation, and she's the one who assassinates Sisera while he's sleeping. There's a whole story there. It'll be one of the chapters in Women from the Nations in the Hebrew Bible if I ever finish that book. Okay. Then the seventh song is called Shirat Chana, the Song of Chana. This we find in Shmuel Aleph in I think you call it First Samuel, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. So who is Chana? Chana is the mother of the prophet Shmuel, Samuel. And the Song of Chana calls attention to the experience of being barren, because Chana herself was barren, which we learn about the chapter before. She confides her pain to God, and after her prayers are completed, she's blessed with a child, not just a child, but a child who becomes the prophet Samuel. And so essentially the Shirat Chana, the Song of Chana, is the story of a woman who was barren for a long time and then was blessed with a child. Okay, 8, 9, and 10. 8 is also another one that I had never heard of, but it is in Second Samuel chapter 22, and in slightly different language, also in Psalm 18. It's called Shirat David. In my neighborhood, actually, there's a synagogue called Shirat David. Literally, it means the Song of David. And I'm wondering if this is where they got it from. I just thought it was like named after some guy named David, but I might be wrong about that. This is the only one of the 10 biblical songs that is mentioned twice in the Hebrew Bible, because it's once in the book of Samuel and once in the book of Tehillim, in the book of Psalms. And this is where King David recounts how difficult his life is, his very survival and existence during parts of his journey where he had a lot of people chasing him. And he sings a song of praise to God and dedicates the song to God after God saves him from the hands of all of his enemies and from the hands of Shaul, of King Saul, the king who tried to kill him. Okay. Then we have this one you certainly have heard of, the Song of Songs. Some people call it the Song of Solomon. It is in Hebrew called Shir HaShirim. This is its own book in Hebrew scripture. The Song of Songs is traditionally understood to be an allegory for the relationship between God and the Jewish people, and it utilizes the example of a loving relationship, even even if like it has very physical, sensual sort of qualities, between a man and a woman. And the 10th one um, is called the Song of Mashiach. And this song has yet to be sung. It will be sung after Mashiach appears on earth. The One tradition has it that the words are in the book of Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verses 2 through 7, and also chapter 26, verse 1. I didn't actually look those up. But I did know about this idea that nine of the songs we know, and the 10th one has not yet been sung, and may we all be gathered together in Jerusalem to sing it together. Okay, that's the 10 she wrote, the 10 biblical songs. I thought you would find that interesting because the Shirat Hayam that appears in our parsha is only one of a series of biblical songs. But I want to switch our attention, and again, now I can't play you this one either, but um I am going to send you the link to listen to the audio file. There's a woman named Linda Hirschhorn who is a musician. I don't know if she's still alive because the first time I heard this was like 30 years ago when I was at a Rosh Chodesh gathering for women. Remember last week we spoke about Rosh Chodesh and how women sometimes get together. And it was actually somewhat early in my Jewish journey. And they played this song, and it made such an impression on me that I remember it all these decades later, because she talks about the experience of Miriam and the women and what happened. But it's also musically very, not that I'm this big musical expert, but I think it's a beautiful song. Okay, so Moshe stops singing, and then something happens. What happens? In the book of Exodus, in the book of Shemot, chapter 15, verses 20 to 21, Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, takes a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines dancing. And Miriam said to them, "Sing to the Lord." Okay, this is the setup. So the song's already been sung. And then Miriam the prophetess gets all of the women to gather together. The men, Moshe and the men have sung, and now Miriam rises to sing the song again. The men sang with their voices, but the women's song, even according to the plain text, they sang using their voices, they had tambourines, and they danced. The women's hearts were full of a greater joy, and their song was deeper and um, more ceremonial, more multi-layered. Now, what was the contribution um, to the women singing? How did Miriam and the women singing surpass even the song of men? So Rashi, the French commentator, explains how the women had these tambourines with them. Now, remember, when they left Egypt, they left, number one, kind of in a hurry. Like you probably have heard this story that they didn't even have time to let their dough rise, and that's why there's a whole matzah situation going on. But they had to pack just what they could carry. But Rashi says the righteous women of that generation were so confident that God would make miracles for them that they prepared tambourines, and I guess they taught each other a certain dance, a circle dance or something. Interestingly, today, often in Rosh Chodesh, especially for Rosh Chodesh for this month, for the month of Shvat, um, it is not unusual to have a Rosh Chodesh gathering where women, and sometimes girls, decorate tambourines to get ready for what? Not the redemption from Egypt, because that already happened, but the ultimate redemption, the final redemption. And so I don't know, I'm assuming that like online you could find this, but all around Israel, it's not hard to find tambourines that they have no decoration. Like it's just a blank canvas, and people decorate their tambourines. You know what? I have a few hanging on my wall. Some of you have been to my home and you have seen them, but I'm gonna take pictures of them and send them to you. Not that I decorated them, but there was an artist that made a few tambourines, decorated and printed them. It's a much higher quality than like some handmade thing, but whatever. It's cool to see. Okay, so so I said when the Jewish people left Egypt, they left very quickly, that they weren't even able to finish baking their bread, but the women were less concerned about their physical sustenance, that they were sure that God would provide. They lived in some like higher dimension beyond the natural reality of, well, if you're going on a long journey, you don't know where you're going, you need to pack food, you need to pack underwear, whatever you need to pack with you. But they packed something that they felt that would be essential. And this, remember, is after a couple of hundred years of being in exile and having witnessed acts um, of terrible violence, of weeping tears for generations, seeing their children cemented alive into brick walls, how these women had the ability to see beyond the affliction that was right in front of them. This connects to the idea that I spoke about, that when you can see the whole picture, then it's easier to hold on during the challenging times. And it makes me think of the videos that I'm assuming we've all seen, of the hostages being released. So after 480 some days of um, unspeakable conditions, and they are restored to their families, that is something like I think a small piece of what the women of this generation, um, their worn and tired and tortured and beaten bodies carried tambourines out of Egypt, instruments which were prepared in order to sing and praise God for the miracles that they knew that would come. So they never lost the vision. Um, and they rebelled against depression. That would be an understandable situation. So as their lives became more bitter, more difficult, their emuna became stronger. Such a lesson for us, I think, right now, right now. Um, and so I think you guys should all go and buy yourself tambourines. And um, I'm guessing that some of you probably actually have heard this story and already have some. But the idea is that knowing beyond a shred of a doubt that God is going to remember them, and their only concern, or their an important concern, was to be prepared to sing with joy and to celebrate the miracles that hadn't happened yet. When they left Egypt, none of this had happened yet, but they had this tremendous well of Emunah, and that idea is also on us as women in our generation, that we are like Emuna, literally, it's a woman's name, actually. It's a Hebrew woman's name, but it's also it's a feminine quality. There's a commentator named the Malbim who explains that the reason the women's song is mentioned separately from the men is to emphasize that the Exodus took place in the merit of the righteous women of that generation, and so they got their own prophecy. There's a rabbinic commentary that says that a maidservant, the idea is that it's somebody like low on the totem pole, a maidservant at the sea saw more than even Yecheskel, Ezekiel. Ezekiel has the whole um, vision of um, the chariots and a lot of high level stuff. What the Malbim is telling us is that, or it's not the Malbim who sings, but whatever, what the rabbis are telling us is that what the women experienced then was um, like on a higher level than what is than the prophecy that Ezekiel got. Okay, that's pretty strong stuff. Okay, um, the time is getting away from me, so I'm just skimming to. Okay, so what is the lesson in this? So the greatness of the women in Egypt was their realization that there was nothing more essential than bringing God into the picture. And here's the lesson for us, that without making God the center of our lives, nothing else has any ultimate purpose. It's only when we are connected to God that any hardship that we're dealing with, or any joy that we have, can last, or any sense of significance. So I know, and I'm sure that you also know people whose lives are not necessarily godly lives, but whatever pleasures they have are transient, right? If they buy something new, a week later they're bored with it. Or if they go through hardships and they don't connect to God and they don't see that their hardship is potentially connected to a bigger story, it's 10 times harder for them than it is for those of us that make God the center of our lives. Um, okay. I want to talk a little bit about Amalek, um, and a lesson from there. Okay, so who is Amalek? Literally, Amalek is the descendant from Esav, from Esau. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the geography of this region, but ironically, the quickest route from Egypt, right now there's a lot of talk in the news about opening up the border between Gaza and Egypt. So the quickest route to Israel from Egypt would have been right up the Mediterranean coast, which is the Gaza Strip. But Hashem was concerned that the newly freed slaves would lose heart and that they would want to return to Egypt if they were confronted by the people who lived there, who we call the Plishtim, the Philistines that lived in the Gaza region. And so instead of going through that Egyptian border up the Mediterranean into Israel, the path was going to be through the Sinai Desert east and then north so that they would enter on the eastern side of the Jordan River, which is exactly how it happened, except it was 40 years later. There's actually, when you come to Israel, you can go. Have any of you ever been where I'm about to say? You've been to the place, Valerie, it's very close to Ma'ale Adumim. It's the place actually where the Israelites crossed over into Israel in the time of Joshua, in the time of Yehoshua. And you can go there now. It's actually a Christian baptism site. Um, and it's also, when we were there, it was a number of years ago, but you have to stay on the main road because the fields to the side of the road have landmines in them, and the army is there. But you can actually kind of drive right up the um, to the Jordan River, which so you guys know that I didn't grow up religious, but I did grow up with this song about Michael Row Your Boat Ashore, right? Which, like, I don't even know what it's about actually, but it talks about the Jordan River, right? The Jordan River today, I don't know what it was like in the time of Joshua exactly, but today it is so narrow that if somebody's standing on the Jordanian side and you're on the Israeli side, you can literally call to them and they can hear you. And in the place, it was a little disappointing to be perfectly honest, because in the place where we were, the water was muddy and I mean, I know people do Christian baptism and stuff there. I've seen many. There were no Christian groups there when we were there, but it is nevertheless, even though it was a little disappointing in the physical realm, it's very cool to think that you are at the place that is identified as the place where the people crossed into Israel. So that was the path. Okay, it took them 40 years for various reasons, but the idea was that they would enter from the eastern side of the Jordan River into Israel. So the the at that juncture, Amalek attacks. And and at that point, it's not an attack over land. Amalek is descended, as I said, from Esav, from Esau. And the grievance is based on this ancient hatred that Esav has towards Jacob, that Esau has towards Jacob. And as a matter of fact, it is a commandment from the Bible to obliterate the memory of Amalek on earth. If any of you have ever been to a Megillah reading on Purim, you know that whenever the name of Haman is pronounced, that if it's a Jewish crowd listening or a crowd that knows what Jews do, right, exactly, Pearl. Like, so we have these noisemakers. Some people stamp their feet, they shake their keys, whatever. The idea is that even we're obliterating the name as it's read from the book of Esther, okay, because Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So, where does this come from? In the book of Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verse 19, this is the biblical commandment. Therefore it will be when the Lord your God grants you respite from all your enemies around you in the land which the Lord your God gives to you as inheritance to possess, that you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens, you shall not forget. That's the biblical commandment. What it means is, okay, right now you've got some, this is the words of Moses. He's addressing the people 40 years before, well, I don't know, 38 years, whatever it is, before they enter into the land of Israel. But he's saying that God is saying, eventually you're going to get there. Eventually things are going to quiet down for you and you're going to be all settled into the land. And then don't forget, he says it twice in this verse, um, that you have the responsibility for obliterating Amalek. Now, how could God command Israel to annihilate an entire other nation? And there's a commentator, we call him Nachmanides, from the 13th century, who explains that this commandment is justified because Amalek's attack was not against Israel, it was an attack against God. Had the war been a political war, God would not have commanded Israel to blot out the enemy nation completely. But Amalek is motivated by a desire to prove their superiority to God, that they are, and therefore they are deserving this level of punitive a punitive measure. So the mitzvah of destroying Amalek is, Israel is challenged with it, that it can only be carried out not from a place of revenge, of personal revenge, but from the sense of protecting God's honor and following God's commandments. Do you understand? That's different from you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you back. Okay. When I was studying this part, I was thinking about, now the Hamas is not Amalek. Okay, the whole Islamic Jihad is not Amalek. That they come from Yishmael, which is another enemy of the Jewish people. But some of this thinking is the same, that they are not fighting like a righteous war over land, because if you know anything, and I'm not going to get too political, but if you know anything about the politics of the um, or the history of the relationship between the Arabs and the Jews in this part of the world, I'm talking about relatively modern history, you know that multiple times that Israel offered the Arabs a state of their own. In 2005, we completely left Gaza with the infrastructure intact, and had they wanted to, they could have had their own state side by side. But instead, they destroyed all of the infrastructure and started, well, they never stopped killing Jews, but they're, what motivated them was wasn't a desire for land, wasn't a desire for a state, which is why, from the perspective of right-wing Israeli Jews, and maybe some of you, the giving them this whole two-state solution thing is absurd, because that's not actually what they want. So Amalek has a similar kind of motivation
Mm.
that did somebody just say something? No, I thought I heard some. Okay, that Malik has a similar kind of motivation, that they don't just want, like, there was no reason for them to attack the Israelites at this stage of the story, because Israelites were not in any jeopardy of taking
Mm.
over their land.
Mm.
They were fighting. Okay, so if you remember, last year sometime we did a session on anti-Semitism,
Mm.
and how anti-Semitism so often is actually not about the Jews as much as it is about the Jews as representing God in the world.
Yeah.
And so what they're
Amen.
fighting is God. Right. Okay. So Helen, it's your
Sorry.
mic that's on. Okay. So that's the story of Amalek. And then actually now, the last thing I want to say is that there's another reason why God led this people through the desert when there was a much more direct way to get there, to get where they wanted to go. a lot of what God does for us, it's true. It was true for the millions of Israelites that were walking through these 40 years, and it's true for us today that God is teaching us by the things that happen to us, right? So God wants them to need to rely on constant miracles in order to survive. So we have the manna, the water. We spoke about this, the constant protection from the elements that God provides. We didn't so much. I didn't talk about the Ananei HaKavod, but we talked about this if we did a session together about Sukkot. I'm not sure if we did, but that God created these cloud. They're called the clouds of glory in English, above, below, to the right, to the left, front and back, to protect them as they traveled through the desert. Okay, so protect them from the elements, so it was never too hot, too cold. Everything that they needed physically was there, and God was educating them. God was teaching them not only about His love for them and how He's going to care for them no matter what, but also about how he is omnipotent and he can control everything. And so the lesson for us is that everything in our lives, just as much as it was true for them, everything is in God's hands. Okay. So it may seem to us we do not have a well of water following us through the desert, and that's where we get our water. We do not have the clouds of glory protecting us, but we have, so we may think that, it's the roof of our house or the walls of our home that are protecting us, or it's the money that I have that I can go buy groceries and cook them in my kitchen. That's what feeds me. Or I turn on my tap and water comes out, and that's how I'm able to have water. But the all of that is a facade over the underlying lesson that God is teaching us, and that is that all of that stuff he's giving it to us as much today in our like everyday lives as much as he gave it to the millions of people as they were wandering through the desert. That everything comes from God, and the more we see that and we are not fooled by the screen. I'm not sure that's a good way of describing it. We're not um yeah, that the physical world doesn't create uh, a block so that we don't see that ultimately it's all from God's hands. So there's an expression in Hebrew that's incredibly relevant for dealing with the time that we're living in. I might have taught you this before. It's called, in Hebrew we say kochi va'otzem yadi, which means my strength and the power of my hands. Um, And that is a very Western way of seeing politics, of seeing current events, of seeing the world. And a lot of people are incredibly frustrated politically. Either now, I'm speaking now from. I'm sorry, I'm just turning the heat down in this room because now it's a little too warm. Um, Incredibly frustrated with what they see going on. I can only speak about. I apologize for the U.S. and Israel. Those are my frames of reference. But I know that there are people incredibly frustrated with what's going on in America, people incredibly frustrated by what's going on in Israel and want the government to do something else. And maybe it's true in South Africa or in the UK or wherever you guys are in the world. But the people who think like that and only like that are stuck in this concept that it's human energy that's moving things along. That a lot of what the Israelites are guilty of, if you can call it that, as they go through these 40 years of complaining to Moshe over and over and over again, is they are guilty of, it's okay to be thirsty and to want water, to need water. That's totally legitimate. But they demanded as if it was Moshe's to give them, as opposed to saying in a kind of pleading way, like, Moshe, we're all thirsty, our children are all thirsty. Can you please ask God to provide water for us? Do you see the difference between that and, Moshe, you have to give us water because we're all going to die here in the desert, or you have to give us meat, or you have to give us food? It is all a question of how much you see God. Okay, I think I made I made the point. Anyway, those are those are the things that I prepared. We have 4 minutes left. If anybody would like to unmute themselves, oh, I see that I missed a bunch of comments. If anybody would like to unmute themselves and share or ask a question, um, or or anything else before we finish up.
Can I ask a question, Rivka?
Okay.
Is Moloch the same as Amalek,
Yes.
the
It's
Amalekites?
yes.
Okay,
So in Hebrew we say Amalek. You call him Amalek.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, Amalekites.
You're right. Same people. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry. It's spelled the same, I think. It's just how
yeah.
you pronounce it. So I try to be really careful. Like I know we've talked about this before that it's important to me to use the Hebrew names for things, but I try to use both when I remember, but I apologize. Yes, same bad
I think
guys.
I remember BB talking about this story, and I mean, there was outrage in England at the suggestion of totally annihilating the Amalekites. But I mean, that's God's way, isn't it? That would solve
Mhm.
lots of problems.
The problem today, though, is isolating who they are
Mm,
because they're like the same thing we talked last week about the Erev. Was it last week we talked about the Erev Rav, right? The Erev Rav who were very clear in this generation of the wandering of the desert was very clear who was the extended family of the Shvatim of the tribes and who was Erev Rav. Now it's not so clear because
mm,
it's been millennia and we're all intermixed. So
mm.
there's the spirit of Amalek, but
Ah,
how do you define? There could be people who are Jewish by Jewish law
mhm,
who have the
Yeah.
souls of the Erev or right. So Andrea's saying they don't exist as a people anymore. It's more of an ideology now. I think that's a,
Mm-hmm.
a fair way of saying it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
That makes
get that.
sense.
Vicky, you want to say something?
I had a quick question. So in Isaiah 46:10, it says that the end is basically, if you want to know the end, look to the beginning. So we've always in Messianic Hebrew roots movement, they talk a lot about the greater Exodus and how the Exodus is going to start and is going to be done all over again. And there's people that have these plans and they're physically prepping to do this greater exodus by foot, which makes no sense to me of how all that's going to work. But what is the Jewish understanding if this is even a concept and eschatology wise? Is that something that you guys even think about?
Okay, yes and no. Not in that sense. Not in the sense of, prepping and walking by foot like that. Here's the concept as I understand it. The souls of the people um, that left Egypt will reincarnate. They will exist again in the generation of Mashiach. And the exodus from Egypt is considered sort of a trial run for Geula, for the ultimate redemption, and that everything that happened to the nation of Israel at that time will replay, but an echo of it, not the exact same thing, like we're all going to walk, from Egypt back into Israel. Not like that at all. I don't know anybody who comes to Israel on foot anymore, except maybe like like somebody who's
Y-
escaping,
Can't really.
what's that?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I didn't know that. You can't.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
right, because right, we have borders, and I mean, I guess you could probably, like some of the refugees from other countries, maybe they get in
yeah. But
somehow.
we have.
But in general, Vicky, that is it's like a seed of an idea that we have and that we teach, but it's way the way you described it is way too literal that that's not how it's going to happen at all, but that there's an echo of what happened in the Exodus from Egypt because that was like the model of redemption. We talked about all of the ways, I don't know, last week I get confused about when we had this conversation, but all of the ways in Jewish practice and in Jewish liturgy that the Exodus from Egypt is remembered, but it's only supposed to be remembered because it's preparation for the big redemption that is yet to come. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. All right, it's not all right, that's our hour. Does anybody have anything pressing, really burning that they need to say before we finish? Oh, Kathy must have gotten the time wrong. Okay. All right, Kathy Craig, do you want to say something? Did you unmute yourself?
I was just showing my decorated
Oh, see?
tambourine.
Okay. All right. How many of you have a tambourine and you've heard this legend before? Yeah. Okay, good. Maybe you guys can send us pictures of your tambourines and the ones that you that don't have it yet. That's a great project for you to do with your families or with your with other women in your community, with your daughters or whoever you've got around. Okay. So, Kathy Morgan, it is very nice to see you. We are finishing. I think you're an hour off. Um, so okay, that's it. That's Parshat Beshalach, and God willing, we will meet together again next week for um, Parshat Yitro when we get the Ten Commandments and we get the Torah. Thanks, guys.